Laban makes two charges. First, he says, "Why have you resorted to outwitting me and carrying my daughters off like captives taken by the sword? Why did you run away secretly and outwit me and not tell me?" The answer to that charge is obvious. Jacob replies, "It was because I was afraid, for I said to myself, 'You might take your daughters away from me by force.'" Laban also charges that Jacob has stolen his household gods. Rachel has indeed stolen the gods, but Jacob knows nothing about this. A search is made, but the idols are not found.
And the reason the idols are not found is disclosed to us in Genesis 31, verses 33 through 35. "And Laban went into Jacob's tent and into Leah's and into the two slave women's." Slavery's fine in the Bible, let's remember. God sees nothing wrong with slavery, it seems. "And did not find anything. And he went out of Leah's tent and into Rachel's, and Rachel had taken the teraphim and laid them in the camel howdah and sat down on them." Worth just pointing out that camels had not been domesticated at the time this supposedly happened, which is sort of interesting in the context of trying to establish the historicity of the account we're reading. Anyway, they'd been hidden in the camel howdah. Rachel sat down on them, and Laban rummaged the whole tent and did not find anything. And she said to her father, "Do not take offense, sir, that I cannot get up on your account, because I am the way women are." And he searched and did not find the teraphim. So Rachel stole her father's gods, her father's idols, and hid them by means of a period, or a fake period. All very odd, isn't it? Especially when we remember that Rachel is Jacob's cousin, who he's been encouraged to marry by his father Isaac. His father Isaac has sent him to pick a wife from Laban, his uncle's daughters, and apparently Isaac made this recommendation knowing that Laban was a man who liked to worship idols. It does beg the question, doesn't it? Why would Laban, recommended by Isaac, have all of these idols in his possession? And furthermore, why does Rachel steal them? And when you research this in the publications, they make all sorts of excuses about essentially Rachel confiscating her father's idols, which doesn't seem like the sort of thing a peacemaker would do. And if you think about it, if that's the sort of behavior that's supposedly admirable, then is there a precedent here for Jehovah's Witnesses to go into people's homes and rip out their crucifixes or rip out their idols and confiscate them? Because that's the message apparently that's being given in this part of the Bible. It seems obvious to me what's happened here. Laban is a polytheist. He's raised his daughter Rachel to be a polytheist. And Rachel cannot countenance moving away from the family home without taking with her the gods she has been raised to worship. That makes the most sense to me. It certainly makes far more sense than Rachel risking her father's wrath and creating a situation that could easily lead to bloodshed. Now, interestingly, I've been doing a lot of reading recently about the Bible in a fantastic newly published book that talks a little bit about this polytheism in the peoples of the Bible, in the Israelites. So here is said book. I'm going to take my bookmark out. It's by Bible scholar Francesca Stavrakopoulou, and it's God and Anatomy. It's an absolutely brilliant book. If you have any interest at all in the Bible, you need to have it in your library. And Dr. Stavrakopoulou has done a lot of digging, a lot of research throughout her career, and discusses very candidly where the worship of Yahweh originates. And it turns out that when you go far enough back in the Bible, or in the early pages of the Bible, namely in Genesis, which is what Mark Sanderson is reading from here in his dramatic Bible reading, it turns out there are clues to this polytheism, or to the fact that Yahweh was not the God who was worshipped by the patriarchs. So let me go to pages 22 and 23. This is going to be quite a long quote, but I feel as though many people who are watching this need this information. Scholars have long suspected that El, not Yahweh, was the original God of the Bible, known in the Bible as Israel. His name not only occurs in the traditions of the patriarchs, but is embedded in the name of Israel itself, and is explicitly revealed in the divine name of a temple Jacob is said to have built at the ancient city of Shechem in what is now the West Bank. He erected an altar there and called it El, God of Israel. We'll look up that verse shortly. Yahweh would gradually come to usurp his father El by supplanting him as the head of the pantheon, but quite how this happened remains frustratingly unclear. It is possible that the transition was tied to the socio-political conditions that gave rise to the emergence of the kingdoms of Israel and Judah early in the first millennium BC. With kingship and statecraft came ideologies of militarized power and the need for kings to exhibit themselves as warriors endorsed by fearsome divine fighters. As a storm god, Yahweh was naturally a god of warfare, equipped with weapons of thunder, lightning, and rain clouds, and it was Yahweh's personal patronage the kings of Israel and Judah claimed. And as the patron deity of these kings, so Yahweh became the tutelary god of their small kingdoms, and the deity increasingly promoted at the ancient temples and sanctuaries within their bounds, whose economic and ritual heft further enabled and enhanced the performance of royal power. While this might account for the political prioritization of Yahweh, and even the deity's acquisition of some of El's traditional roles, titles, and sanctuaries, it is still unknown exactly how or when Yahweh came to be understood as the head of the pantheon, and it is impossible to say whether or not this view of the pantheon was shared by ordinary Israelites and Judahites, for whom the religious ideologies of statehood remained relatively unimportant. What is more certain is that cultural memories of El's traditional role persisted, suggesting they remained too potent or too deeply ingrained to be ignored or excised from the religious traditions on which biblical authors and editors subsequently drew. Instead, a different theological strategy was employed. In a spectacularly transparent attempt at spin doctoring, some writers sought to downplay Yahweh's apparent supplanting of his mythic father by insisting that Yahweh was El all along. I am Yahweh, the deity says to Moses in Exodus. I appeared to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob as El Shaddai, but by my name Yahweh, I did not make myself known to them. I read this and I was like, wow, how did I not know this? How did I not even notice that at some point in the Bible, God's calling himself El Shaddai, and then when he speaks to Moses, he's rebranding himself as Yahweh, as Jehovah. How did I not notice this or ask questions about it? Because, you know, you can do any amount of dancing around and say, oh, well, this makes perfect sense. Of course, God would want to rename himself. It's his right to do so. But what utility is there if you are the supreme creator of all things? If you've created humankind, how is it helpful to be changing your name like that? Especially early on in this saga that's later to become the Bible. How is it helpful to start off calling yourself El Shaddai and end up calling yourself Yahweh? It's, for me, just adding needless confusion. It doesn't help at all. All of the confusion dissipates, though, when you accept the obvious, namely that there was a transition from worship of El, who was the head of a pantheon of deities, and worship shifted from that particular religion to a monotheistic faith where Yahweh was the only one who was supposed to be worshipped. And what's interesting is it's there in the Bible if you know where to look, because as Francesca Stavrakopoulou has described, these things were too firmly entrenched in people's memories to just get rid of them. So if you're going to re-edit the Bible or bring together a whole bunch of disparate versions of Judaism, you can't just write out worship of El when loads of people are familiar with these stories. What you have to do is kind of cleverly try to explain everything. You need to leave in the text stories like the one Mark Sanderson is referring to, where Rachel steals her father's gods because they are polytheists, because it's not just one god, it's a pantheon of gods, and El is the head of the pantheon. Let's again see that image from Wikipedia of an actual statue of El. So archaeologists are finding statues of this god. It's not just scholars inventing some story. There's hard evidence that El was worshipped as a separate god and idols were made of him. So that's the sort of idol we're talking about here when Mark Sanderson is talking about Rachel stealing her father Laban's gods. And you'll remember there's a verse referred to in the book God and Anatomy. It's actually Genesis 33, verses 18 through 20. And Jacob came peaceably to the city of Shechem in Canaan when he came from Paddan Aram and camped near the front of the city, and bought the lot of open country where he had pitched his tent from the sons of Hamor, the father of Shechem, for 100 kesitars. Sounds like quite a good price, that. And set up an altar there, and named it El Elo Israel. So he builds an altar to El. And again, because this story, along with the story of Rachel stealing her father's gods, was so firmly entrenched in the knowledge of the people who were reading these texts, the ones who revised the Bible couldn't just simply erase them. They had to keep them in there, but then create this narrative to explain why El is being worshipped pre-Exodus and Yahweh is being worshipped post-Exodus. So just fascinating stuff. I'm really glad that Mark Sanderson has decided to dig up this otherwise unremarkable and frankly quite boring story for the dramatic Bible reading, because it's given me an opportunity to right out of the gate, almost immediately after reading about all this, in an actual book of Bible scholarship, because let's be honest, the members of the governing body clearly don't know the first thing about Bible scholarship. I'm glad I have this opportunity to right out of the gate share what for me is quite a new revelation, but it makes total sense. And I'm beating myself up that I never noticed it before.
Jacob wants peaceful relations with his brother. He sends a generous gift, hundreds of animals, to help make that possible. Was Jacob weak-minded, too cowardly to stand up to his brother? Not at all. Why, as the time neared for the meeting with Esau, Jacob wrestles with an angel until dawn to receive further assurance of Jehovah's blessing.
Jacob wrestles with an angel until dawn to receive further assurance of Jehovah's blessing. An angel. This is one of those stories, a little bit like with Jephthah's daughter, where you just swallow this narrative that gets spoon-fed to you and you never question it. And I think even in popular culture, there's a U2 song that talks about Jacob wrestling an angel. You just kind of accept, oh yeah, well, that makes sense. Jacob had a fight with an angel. And yeah, that's a totally normal thing that you might expect. But then you actually read the verse itself. Let's read it, shall we? Does it describe Jacob wrestling with an angel? Genesis 32, verses 23 through 30. And he took them and sent them across the Arroyo and sent across what he had. And Jacob was left alone. And a man wrestled with him till the dawn came up. And he saw that he could not do anything with him. And he touched his groin. And Jacob's groin was sprained in his wrestling with him. Happens to me all the time when I'm wrestling. And he said, let me go, because the dawn has come up. But he said, I will not, unless you bless me. And he said, what is your name? And he said, Jacob. And he said, no longer Jacob shall you be named, but Israel, because you have struggled with God and with men and succeeded. Israel. And Jacob asked, tell me your name. But he said, what do you ask my name for? And blessed him there. And Jacob named the place Penuel, because I saw God face to face and came off with my life. I saw God face to face. Does it even say the word angel in that entire account? I'm scanning through now. I don't believe even once I've read the word angel, and yet Mark Sanderson knows better than the Bible. Mark Sanderson is helping the Bible writers out a bit, giving them a bit of a leg up, just like the organization's done in its doctored New World Translation, where I've been finding in my doctored series, thumbnail here if Tibor is gracious to the first episode, just so many examples of text that has been changed. Because, quite frankly, the organization doesn't respect the Bible and feels its own dogma and its own theology is more important than the words that it claims are the words of God or have been inspired by God. So Mark Sanderson is displaying the same arrogance here by putting words in the mouths of the Bible writers and saying that Jacob wrestled with an angel, when in fact the angel was God, At least none of this happened, really, did it? Or at least there's no archaeological evidence to support it happening. But, taking the account on face value, Jacob wrestles with God. God names him Israel, because you have struggled with God and with men and succeeded. And Jacob names the place Penuel, because I saw God face to face and came off with my life. El worship. Further evidence of it right there in plain sight. But very cleverly, the editors of the Bible have managed to explain away El. What they couldn't do is explain this particular wrestling match. So Mark Sanderson's come to the rescue and said, no, it was an angel, trust me. How did we miss this? How did we miss the fact that there was El worship in the time of the patriarchs? The clues were there all along. Israel, Penuel, El Shaddai being referred to in the Old Testament. And if you think about it, the very name of the place where Mark Sanderson lives and works, Beth-El. Bethel is also a name that derives from El worship, Beth-El meaning house of God, God being El. So again, mind blown. If you haven't got it already, I thoroughly recommend reading this book or ordering it, God and Anatomy. I'm only up to page 60 so far. So I guess I'll have more to say about it in future videos. But isn't it refreshing to see a light shone on the Bible that genuinely makes sense and makes things clearer, rather than the confusing babble that charlatans like Mark Sanderson spew?